There's a quiet kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up in your face or your posture, but you feel it deep inside. It's the weight of saying yes when everything inside you whispered no. It's the subtle ache of helping, fixing, giving, over and over, until you don't even recognize where your own needs begin. We talk so much about compassion in this world, but what we rarely talk about is how compassion without boundaries turns into self-neglect. The Buddha taught that true peace comes not from pleasing others, but from aligning with our own truth. And if you've ever felt drained after doing a so-called small favor, this video is going to shine a light on why that keeps happening and how to finally break the cycle. We're going deep into Buddhist wisdom today to explore the kind of awareness that protects your energy, honors your heart, and helps you walk through the world with grounded strength. So stay with me. Don't skip a moment of this, because every piece of what we're about to unpack fits together like a path back to yourself. And if you appreciate the kind of conversations we're having here, where clarity, peace, and presence are valued, there's one simple free favor I'll ask in return. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It means more than you know. Let's begin. There's something most people don't realize about respect. It doesn't come from effort alone. You can work harder, speak louder, give more, even try to be endlessly kind. But if deep down, you're still seeking approval from others, chasing their validation, trying to earn their respect like it's a prize, you'll always feel like you're one step behind. Respect that's chased is never stable. It depends on other people's moods, opinions, and expectations. And in the Buddhist path, we're reminded again and again, anything that depends on something outside of us is not true peace. It's attachment dressed up as ambition. The Buddha never taught us to beg for recognition. He didn't say, go out and prove your worth. He taught presence. He taught self-awareness. He taught us that when we live in alignment with our values, with kindness, wisdom, and clarity, respect is no longer something we need to ask for. It arrives naturally, not because we forced it, but because people can feel our authenticity. They can sense when someone is rooted in truth, not performance. And that kind of energy, it's magnetic. It draws others in, not because you're trying to impress them, but because you're finally at peace with yourself. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you paused and truly respected yourself first? Not the version of you that shows up for everyone else, but the part of you that's tired, the part that's been overlooked, the part that just wants to be seen, not for what it does, but for who it is. The Buddha taught that everything begins with the mind. If your inner world is filled with self-judgment and insecurity, it doesn't matter how much respect you receive from others. You won't be able to feel it. It won't land. It won't nourish you. Because the real wound isn't about how they see you, it's about how you see you. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop chasing respect, the moment you stop trying to prove yourself, is the moment others begin to see your strength. When you embody calm instead of seeking control, when you speak gently instead of trying to sound impressive, when you act from clarity instead of fear, that's when your presence becomes powerful. The Buddha called this right intention. It's one of the steps of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's about doing things not from desperation or ego, but from wisdom and compassion. And when your intentions are clear and kind, you don't have to demand respect. You become it. This shift is quiet but powerful. It's not about becoming passive or indifferent. It's about becoming centered. You still speak. You still show up. But now, you're not doing it to earn something. You're doing it because it feels aligned with your inner truth. And that truth is steady, no matter how the world responds. Respect rooted in truth is like a tree with deep roots. It doesn't shake just because the wind blows. The Buddha once said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." If you think you're not enough, you'll spend your life overcompensating. You'll work too hard, give too much, speak too fast, hoping that someone somewhere will finally see you. But when you begin to see yourself, when you sit with your breath, when you notice your own thoughts with compassion instead of judgment, that's when the whole game changes. You stop moving from emptiness. You begin moving from fullness. You know that strange feeling you get when you agree to something and it just doesn't sit right. It could be as small as saying yes to a phone call when you're already exhausted, or as big as agreeing to help someone with something you really didn't have the capacity for. On the outside, everything looks fine. You smile, you nod, you go along with it. But inside, there's this quiet discomfort, like a knot in your chest or a whisper in your mind saying, "This isn't what I wanted." That's not just irritation, that's your inner wisdom speaking. That's the voice of awareness telling you that somewhere in that moment you left yourself behind. The Buddha often spoke about the importance of being in alignment with one's own truth. In fact, one of the central teachings in Buddhism is right intention, a part of the Noble Eightfold Path. It reminds us that every action begins in the mind, and if our intentions aren't clear, honest and rooted in compassion, including compassion for ourselves, then our actions create suffering. And not always in loud, obvious ways. Sometimes it's the small betrayals that hurt the most, like when we say yes to avoid conflict, or when we agree just because we're afraid of being seen as selfish, difficult, or unkind. But let's be honest, how many times have we done that? Said yes when our whole body was quietly begging us not to. It's subtle. You might tell yourself, "It's just easier this way," or "I don't want to disappoint anyone." And maybe you even get through it without too much trouble. But afterward, you feel it. That drained, heavy feeling that follows doing something from guilt or fear instead of love and clarity. That feeling is a sign. It's not a weakness. It's not oversensitivity. It's the Buddha's teaching in real time. The cost of abandoning your truth is always paid in peace. Now, Buddhism doesn't teach us to reject others or live in isolation. Quite the opposite. It encourages connection, kindness, and compassion. But those virtues must be rooted in mindfulness. Giving should come from a place of fullness, not from pressure. When you give because you feel obligated or afraid of someone's reaction, you're not practicing generosity. You're practicing self-abandonment. And here's where it gets even deeper. Each time you override your own needs, even for the sake of harmony, you slowly weaken your relationship with yourself. Over time, you stop trusting your own instincts. You second-guess what you feel. You begin living for others' comfort instead of your own truth. The Buddha taught that the path to liberation begins with seeing clearly. That includes seeing the patterns we've normalized, people-pleasing, overextending, sacrificing our rest and well-being for the sake of being nice. But real kindness, Buddhist kindness, isn't about bending until you break. It's about presence. It's about being so in tune with your inner experience that when you give, it's with a full heart, not a resentful one. So the next time someone asks something of you, pause, breathe, check in. Not with guilt or overthinking, but with gentle awareness. Ask yourself, am I doing this from love or fear? From truth or obligation? That one moment of honesty can change everything. It reconnects you with yourself. It reminds you that your peace matters too. And as the Buddha so beautifully taught, you cannot pour from an empty cup. You too deserve your own compassion. You know that moment when someone you care about leans in and says, "Can you just do me a favor? Don't tell anyone." And suddenly you're holding something heavy. Maybe it's a small lie, maybe it's something they said or did that doesn't sit quite right with you. And in that instant, without even realizing it, you've been handed a burden that's not yours. What's worse is that it often comes wrapped in guilt, because saying no might make you seem disloyal, uncaring, or like you're overreacting, so you keep the secret, you cover the lie. And on the surface, everything looks fine. But underneath, that quiet tension builds, that inner voice, The one that speaks when everything else is silent, starts to whisper, "This isn't yours to carry." In Buddhism, one of the core teachings along the Eightfold Path is right speech. And it's not just about telling the truth to others. It's about living in harmony with your own truth. The Buddha never said, "Avoid conflict at all costs." He didn't say, "Be agreeable so people like you." He taught that words matter because they shape not only how we communicate, but how we experience the world and ourselves. When we speak something we don't truly believe, or we agree to silence when our heart is uneasy, we create disharmony within. And that disharmony, that inner conflict, is where suffering begins. You might tell yourself it's not a big deal, that it was just a white lie, that you didn't want to make things harder for someone. And I get that, truly. Your heart wants to help. Your intentions are kind, but intention without awareness can still lead to harm. The Buddha was clear on this. Peace doesn't come from avoiding discomfort. It comes from facing things honestly, with wisdom and compassion. And that includes the discomfort that arises when someone asks you to betray your own sense of what's right, even in a small way. Here's the thing most people don't say out loud. When you agree to carry someone's lie, you don't just protect them. You also silence a part of yourself. You might feel a little anxious. You might second-guess your choices. You might even start avoiding the person because their presence reminds you of the truth you're not speaking. That's not peace. That's quiet suffering. The Buddha would call it a form of attachment, not to a person or object, but to the illusion of harmony. But harmony that depends on your silence? That's not real, that's performance, and no lasting peace comes from pretending. So what do? It doesn't mean you need to confront people aggressively or call them out. Buddhism teaches us to lead with compassion. You can be firm and kind at the same time. You might say something like, "I care about you, but I'm not comfortable keeping this between us." That one sentence can feel terrifying, but it's also incredibly freeing. It's a way of protecting your inner peace without attacking anyone else. It's not about punishing the other person, it's about honoring yourself. There's a beautiful teaching from the Buddha that says, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And the more you live in alignment with truth, your truth, the less energy you spend managing lies, avoiding conversations, or playing roles that don't reflect who you are. You get to live lighter, clearer, more present, and the people who truly respect you will respect your honesty, even if it makes them uncomfortable in the moment. There's a moment, small, quiet, almost invisible, when giving turns into guilt. You're not sure exactly when it happened, but you feel it. Maybe it started when someone close to you needed a little help. They were struggling, and of course you care, so you offered what you could. Maybe it was a small loan. Maybe you covered their bill. Maybe you said yes before you even thought twice because in your heart you didn't want to see them suffer. But then days passed, weeks, and they never brought it up again. Or maybe they did, but only to ask for more. And now here you are, stuck in this strange space between compassion and resentment. You want to keep being generous, but you're starting to wonder if this giving is costing you more than you thought. Not just money, but your peace of mind. In Buddhism, the act of giving is deeply respected. It's called dana, generosity, and it's considered a noble virtue. The Buddha taught that giving can free the heart from attachment. It can soften greed, loosen fear, and build connection. But here's the part that people often miss. True generosity must arise from clarity, from presence, from awareness. Because if it comes from guilt, pressure, or the fear of disappointing someone, it's not generosity, it's a form of clinging. And clinging, the Buddha said, is one of the roots of suffering. Think about it. When you give beyond your emotional or financial capacity, are you truly at peace? Or does a little tension sit in your chest afterward? Do you feel lighter or quietly burdened? This matters more than most people realize. The Buddha reminded us that every action leaves a trace in the mind. And when we act out of alignment, When we give while our inner voice is saying, "This doesn't feel right," we create an internal split. That split leads to confusion, regret, and sometimes even bitterness. Suddenly, what was meant to be an act of kindness becomes a seed of inner conflict. And it gets even more complicated when patterns form. You say yes once, and suddenly it becomes expected. You become the generous one, the reliable one, the one who always helps. And while that might sound noble, it slowly chips away at your energy if it's not rooted in balance. Buddhism teaches us the middle way, the path that avoids extremes. Giving everything and giving nothing are both extremes. The wisdom is in knowing when to give, how much to give, and whether it truly aligns with your heart. There's also something powerful the Buddha said, that all things arise from intention. If your intention is to help, that's beautiful. But it must include the intention to preserve your own well-being too. You are not a bank. You are not a savior. You are a human being with needs, limits, and responsibilities. Ignoring those limits doesn't make you spiritual. It makes you exhausted. And exhaustion is not enlightenment. It's just burnout with a kind face. So what do you do when someone asks for money and something inside you hesitates? You pause. You breathe. You check in with your body. If there's tightness, discomfort, or fear, honor that. That's your inner teacher speaking. Buddhism teaches us to listen closely to those small signals. They are often more truthful than the stories we tell ourselves. You don't have to lie. You don't have to justify. A gentle, honest response like, "I wish I could, but it's not something I can offer right now," is enough. You are not responsible for fixing every storm in someone else's life. You know that feeling when someone reaches out to you, and before you even open the message or answer the call, something in your body tenses up. You're already bracing yourself, because you know it's not just a hello, it's another request, another favor, another quick thing that somehow never feels quick. And here's the part we don't talk about enough. You want to help. You really do. You care about people. You value connection. But deep down, you're starting to realize that you've become everyone's emotional first responder. The person they come to when they need something, but rarely the one they check in on just to say, "How are you doing?" In Buddhist teaching, mindfulness isn't only about watching your breath or sitting in stillness. It's about noticing, with clear and compassionate awareness, how your life is unfolding moment by moment. That includes how often your boundaries are quietly being crossed. The Buddha taught us the importance of the middle way, not being too harsh, not being too indulgent, but finding balance. And this right here, being constantly available for others at the cost of your own energy, is an imbalance that can slowly erode your peace. Sometimes it starts so subtly. A friend texts, "Can I call you real quick?" A co-worker asks, "Would you mind helping me just this once?" A family member drops a task in your lap with, "You're so good at this. I knew I could count on you." And before you know it, you've said yes to something that your body, your schedule, and your spirit didn't agree to. The cost might not show up right away, but later, when you're lying awake at night, when you can't focus, when you feel drained, you start wondering why you're so tired. The Buddha would tell you to look at your actions, not just your intentions. Are you giving from a place of fullness? Or are you giving out of habit, fear, or guilt? This is where we need to be brutally honest with ourselves first. Because the truth is, many of us learned somewhere along the way that being helpful makes us valuable. That if we're not available, we're not lovable. That saying no might mean we lose connection. But the Buddha taught that clinging, whether it's to relationships, roles, or identities, is one of the roots of suffering. If you're clinging to the role of the helpful one, you might be feeding an identity that keeps you trapped in exhaustion. That's not kindness, that's attachment wearing a mask. The real turning point is when you begin to see that your time and your presence are sacred, that your peace is not a bonus, it's the foundation. You can still care deeply, you can still show up for people, but from a place of mindfulness, not obligation. And that might mean saying something as simple as, I care about you, but I can't take this on right now. That one sentence, spoken with calm and clarity, is a form of compassion for yourself and for them. And because here's the beautiful part. When you stop rushing to say yes to everything, something shifts. You begin to hear yourself more clearly. You create space in your life for the things that nourish you. You become someone who gives mindfully, not endlessly. And ironically, people begin to respect your presence even more because they know it's not given out of habit, but out of choice. There's a moment that doesn't seem like much at first. Someone you care about, maybe a friend or a relative, asks for a little help. They say, "I just need you to sign here," or "Can you just take care of this one thing for me?" It sounds simple, maybe even flattering, like they trust you, like you're the one they count on when things get serious. But as you look closer, something doesn't feel quite right. They're asking you to take the risk, but they're keeping their hands clean. They're not really in it with you. You're the one carrying the weight, and if anything goes wrong, you're the one who'll face the consequences. And here's the thing, they might not even realize they're doing it, but that doesn't make it any less dangerous to your peace. In Buddhist teachings, there's a strong emphasis on right action, one of the 8 steps on the Noble Eightfold Path. It means doing things with clarity, with integrity, and from a place of deep awareness. It means that your choices, no matter how small, must be rooted in wisdom, not fear or confusion. When someone places their burden on you under the label of a small favor, and you feel pressure to say yes just to keep the peace, you're stepping outside that alignment. You're not acting from truth, you're acting from obligation or worse, guilt. And that's where suffering begins. The Buddha was clear about this. Actions taken without mindfulness plant seeds of inner conflict, and eventually those seeds grow into stress, anxiety, and confusion. There's a deeper issue underneath this dynamic, and it often goes unnoticed. When you constantly say yes to carrying other people's risks, whether it's taking responsibility at work for something they did, signing your name on something you're unsure about, or being the emotional shield in a messy situation, you're teaching yourself that your safety, your clarity, and your well-being matter less than someone else's comfort. You might not even realize how often you're doing it, but over time your nervous system does. Your body starts to associate helping with anxiety. Your mind begins to resist every new request, even from people you love, and you're left wondering why everything feels so heavy, even when nothing looks that dramatic on the outside. This is why the Buddha emphasized discernment. In Pali, this is known as vijja, clear seeing. When you pause before responding to someone's request and you check in with your inner landscape, you're not being selfish, you're being wise. Buddhism doesn't ask us to reject others. It asks us to act from inner alignment. That means saying no when something doesn't feel right. That means stepping back from situations where others are unwilling to carry their own share of the weight. You are not meant to be someone else's safety net at the cost of your own peace, especially not when the risk is real and the consequences are yours alone. Here's the shift. Instead of reacting automatically with a yes, try asking yourself, is this my path or theirs? That one question can save you from years of resentment, regret, and burnout. If the answer doesn't come immediately, that's okay. The Buddha taught that awareness is cultivated over time, like tending a garden. You don't rush to judgment, but you also don't silence your inner voice. That pause, that breath between stimulus and response, that's your practice, that's the space where wisdom lives. And when you do say no, say it calmly. Say it without anger or explanation. A simple, "This doesn't feel aligned for me right now," is enough. You're not rejecting the person, you're respecting the balance. And here's the beautiful part. The more you honor your own clarity, the more others begin to feel it too. They might not like it at first, especially if they're used to you always stepping in. But over time, they'll learn that your presence isn't for rent, it's rooted, grounded, unshakable. There's a certain kind of tension that lives in the background of your mind. It doesn't shout, but it hums, quietly, persistently. It's the weight of something someone asked you to keep to yourself. Maybe it was personal, maybe it was about someone else, maybe it made you feel uncomfortable the moment they said, "Please don't tell anyone." And now, days or weeks later, you're still carrying it. Not because it's yours, but because you were too kind or too unsure to say no. That's how it starts. A simple secret, but the cost is rarely simple. Over time, it eats away at your sense of ease. You feel a little more distant from yourself, a little less clear. And the reason is subtle but real. You're holding something that doesn't align with your inner truth. In Buddhist practice, the mind is our home. It's the space we live in before, during, and after every experience. And that's why what we carry in our minds matters so deeply. When we agree to hold a secret that makes us uncomfortable, especially one that involves harm, deception, or moral conflict, we're not just agreeing to silence. We're creating a divide between what we know and what we allow ourselves to speak. The Buddha spoke often of right speech, not just in the words we say, but in the integrity behind them. When your inner knowing and your outer silence no longer match, it creates what the teachings call dukkha, a subtle form of suffering. You might not even realize it's there, but your body does, your sleep does, your peace does. And the thing is, we're taught from a young age that being a good friend means keeping secrets, that loyalty means staying silent, that love means protecting someone, even from the truth. But in Buddhism, love is not about protecting illusions. It's about clarity. It's about compassion that uplifts, not comfort that conceals. When someone asks you to hide something that doesn't feel right, they're not just asking for trust. They're asking you to compromise your inner alignment. And often we say yes because we don't want to seem disloyal or judgmental. But let's be honest, what kind of loyalty costs you your own inner stillness? There's also a difference between sacred confidentiality and secrecy rooted in fear. Sacred confidentiality happens when someone shares their pain, their vulnerability, their healing process, and they trust you to hold it gently. That kind of sharing is a gift. But secrecy rooted in fear, especially when it's used to protect dishonesty or avoid consequences, that's a burden disguised as a bond. And when you carry that kind of weight, you start to question yourself. You wonder if you're doing the right thing. You replay conversations in your mind. And slowly, without realizing it, your natural openness is replaced by cautious silence. That's not peace, that's quiet confusion. The Buddha reminded us that truth is like the sun and the moon. It cannot be long hidden. Eventually, what's false will rise to the surface. And when it does, we're left asking ourselves why we carried it for so long. What were we protecting, and at what cost? If you find yourself holding a secret that feels heavy, take a moment to reflect. Is this mine to carry? Does keeping this silence bring peace? Or does it create conflict within me? Those are not small questions, they are spiritual questions, because in the Buddhist path, every action, spoken or unspoken, either brings us closer to clarity or further from it. So what can you do when someone asks you to hold a secret that doesn't feel right? You don't need to be harsh, you don't need to expose them, but you can be honest. You can say something like, "I care about you, but I'm not comfortable keeping this." You're not betraying them, you're choosing not to betray yourself. And that's a powerful shift. That one decision might make the other person uncomfortable, but it also might inspire them to live more openly. Either way, you're staying in alignment with your values. And that's how real respect grows. Not from pleasing others, but from standing gently in your truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to choose truth over comfort, clarity over silence, and peace over pressure. You don't have to carry what was never yours to begin with. Let go gently and return to the stillness within you. If this spoke to your heart, there's another video waiting for you right now that will take you even deeper on this path. Watch it next. You're ready for it. And thank you truly for being a part of Buddhist journey.